The first real betrayal didn't come when the will was read. It came right before in a whisper. You were just his charity case. My Uncle Calvin said it like he was commenting on the weather. Quiet, almost casual, but with just enough edge to split skin. I didn't flinch. That would have been a win for him. Next to him, Tessa, my cousin, dressed in silk too bright for morning, laughed lightly without even looking up from her phone. He only tolerated you. Everyone knew that. The way she said it, you'd think I wasn't even in the room. And honestly, to them I never really was. I sat still, hands folded tight in my lap. In this family, speaking up was like drawing blood, and silence was armor. I learned that early. Words could be twisted. Reactions could be mocked. But silence, that was mine. We were seated around the massive dining table in my grandfather's estate. This long, polished oak monstrosity older than most of the people in the room. Oil portraits of ancestors lined the walls like judgmental spectators. The air smelled like lemon polish and history no one questioned. Uncle Calvin, sharp in his navy suit and Rolex, sat at the head of the table like the patriarch already. Tessa lounged beside him, nails perfect, legs crossed, phone in hand. Me. I was Sarai Monroe. The girl who'd been brought in out of necessity. The girl who stayed quiet, followed rules, and tried not to take up space in a house that never invited her in. I wore a black dress I'd once bought for a scholarship banquet. Simple, creaseless, unfussy. No diamonds. No designer heels. Just me. Came because I thought I should. Not because I expected to receive anything. Howard Monroe had raised me, yes, but it was never out of love. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, he took me in. He gave me food. Tutors. But never warmth. Never affection. Not once did he call me his granddaughter. He was structured. Clinical. You could set a clock by his morning routine. Coffee at 6:15, newspaper by 6:30, silence until at least 8. And yet, some foolish part of me still hoped that maybe there was something beneath the cold. That maybe taking me in wasn't just obligation. That maybe I meant something to him. Mr. Blanchard stood near the end of the table. He was the family lawyer. Neat, composed, with an expression like he'd already memorized every legal detail. He'd worked with the Monroes for decades and, unlike most of them, had always treated me like I belonged in the room. He cleared his throat and began reading. To my son Calvin Monroe. The Monroe Real Estate Portfolio. The antique car collection. Majority shares in the company. Calvin didn't react. He just nodded like he'd already made peace with the fact that it was all his. Like he owned it the moment our grandfather took his last breath. To my granddaughter Tessa Monroe. The family jewels. The contents of the Aspen storage vault. And the remainder of the Livingston Trust. Tessa looked up for a heartbeat. She smirked, tossed a glance my way, then resumed scrolling like it was all just background noise. No one else was named. No one said my name. And honestly, I had expected that. I had braced for the blow. Had told myself over and over that I would walk out of here with nothing. That I was here for closure, not recognition. But then Mr. Blanchard paused. He turned the page in his folder with care, his voice shifting slightly. There is one final instruction, he said. And then he looked directly at me. Your grandfather left a private video message. It is addressed to Sarai Monroe and no one else. The room reacted as one unit. A quiet, collective ripple of disbelief. Calvin's body went stiff. His fingers tapped against the table once, then stopped. What kind of message? He asked too quickly. A video, Blanchard said. Recorded shortly before his passing. Per his wishes, it cannot be played or discussed unless Sarai gives her consent. Tessa rolled her eyes and dropped her phone in her lap. You've got to be kidding me, she said. She gets a video? That's it. Calvin didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He just stared, like I had reached across the table and picked up something that was never meant to be touched. So I didn't speak. My hands were trembling under the table, knotted so tightly I couldn't feel my fingers. I didn't know what the video would say. Part of me didn't want to find out, not with all of them watching. Not if it proved them right. Not if it proved me wrong. But then I looked at Mr. Blanchard. He wasn't giving me a pitying smile. He wasn't watching the others. He was focused entirely on me, steady, quiet, expectant. And for once I felt like maybe I wasn't just background. Maybe this moment actually belonged to me. I nodded. Blanchard retrieved a slim silver flash drive from his briefcase. He walked over to the laptop set up at the far end of the table and inserted it. The screen came to life. And suddenly there he was. Howard Monroe. My grandfather. Older, paler, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. Still Howard. He wore his usual navy sweater. Sat in that high-backed leather chair from his study. The room behind him was familiar. The old globe, the dark wood shelves, the grandfather clock. Then he spoke. Sarah, he said, his voice steady. If you're seeing this, then I'm already gone. But there are things I should have said while I was alive. Things you deserve to hear. No one moved. Even the air felt still. Tessa's face twitched. Calvin's fingers curled slightly. But I didn't look at them. I looked at the screen. At the man I had spent my entire life trying to impress. And for the first time ever, he was speaking directly to me. Sarai, his voice continued from the screen, low but clear, you were never supposed to be a burden. I felt something tighten in my chest. He wasn't speaking like the man I had known in life. The silent, cold disciplinarian who passed me in hallways without so much as a glance. This was someone else. Someone who wanted to explain. You were the only one in this house who never asked me for anything, he said. Not once. You earned everything you had, not with entitlement but with resilience. I could hear someone shifting in their chair behind me. Probably Tessa. I didn't turn around. My grandfather looked down briefly in the video. When he looked back up, his expression had changed. Softer but heavier. Like he'd spent decades avoiding what he was about to say. You came to me at 12. Your parents, Rebecca and James, gone in a blink. I wasn't ready to raise another child, Sarai. Not after everything that happened with Calvin's mother. But I couldn't turn you away. He paused. Because James was my son. The words landed like thunder. Loud in my bones. Silent in the room. Calvin shifted. Foley. Tessa let out a sharp breath. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to believe I'd misheard. But no. I hadn't. Pie's son, Howard repeated. Your father was my child. Not born within marriage, no. It was the 60s, things were different. I was young. Ambitious. Foolish. And scared. Scared of what the Monroe name might lose if the world found out. So I kept my distance. I let society shame me into silence. He looked older now. Even on video. Like the weight of memory had finally caught up with him. I failed him. I wasn't there for James, and when he died I saw you. A second chance I didn't deserve. So I took you in. But I didn't know how to love you properly. I didn't know how to be a father. Or a grandfather. Or even human most days. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I was Howard Monroe's granddaughter by blood. The child of a son he never acknowledged. The stray they all said didn't belong had more right to the name than any of them. Tessa crossed her arms, staring at the screen like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Calvin's face had gone white. Howard's voice dropped lower. I saw how hard you worked. I saw the way you kept your head down, the way you tried to make yourself invisible so you wouldn't upset the balance. You thought no one noticed. But I did. A flash of memory hit me, studying late with a flashlight under the covers, skipping meals to make groceries stretch further, pretending not to hear Calvin mocking me to staff in the next room. You covered for Calvin, my grandfather said, and now his voice took on an edge. When he used company funds to bail out that disastrous tech startup, you helped pay the accountant's silence fee with your college savings. The room shifted. There was a noise, the sound of Calvin's chair scraping back sharply. You what? Tessa hissed, twisting in her seat. I didn't turn around. I just kept watching. You shouldn't have had to do that, Howard said. But you did. And not once did you complain. You stayed loyal. Even when no one else returned the favor. Mr. Blanchard stepped forward and paused the video. There's more, he said quietly. But before we continue, I need to state something for the record. He reached into his briefcase and retrieved a black folder. Several years ago, Mr. Monroe initiated a legal adoption process. It was finalized. Under the law, Sarai Monroe is not only his biological granddaughter, she is his daughter. She is his direct legal heir. The silence cracked. Calvin stood up fast. This is a joke, he snapped. That was never, he was senile. He never mentioned this to anyone. Blanchard didn't blink. He filed the petition personally. I have notarized documents with his and the court's signatures. It is binding. Tessa stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Like I'd been swapped with someone else mid-conversation. I looked down at the table. My hands were trembling. My voice when it came was low but steady. I didn't know. And I didn't. Not any of it. Not the adoption. Not the video. Not the bloodline. I had spent my whole life thinking I was the outsider. The obligation. Now I was the daughter. The heir. Mr. Blanchard turned the page in the folder. As the legal heir and designated successor, he said, Sarai Monroe now holds majority control of Monroe Enterprises. Ownership of the estate, the family trust and executive voting rights transfer to her immediately, per the final will. The table was no longer a table. It was a battlefield. Calvin's eyes were glassy with fury. Tessa looked like someone had slapped her. Me. I was still frozen. Not with fear. Not with guilt. With the weight of finally being seen. Mr. Blanchard continued, his voice now clinical again. Howard Monroe revised the Monroe Enterprises bylaws last spring. He formally named Sarai as successor CEO. The paperwork has been filed with the board. The transition is already underway. Calvin exhaled loudly and leaned forward, both palms on the table. You knew about this? He growled. I didn't, I said again, looking up at him. Not a word. And it was true. I had spent my entire life assuming I would never be enough for this family. Never belong. Never matter. And now the man who never once said, I love you, had handed me everything they thought would be theirs. Mr. Blanchard looked to me. Would you like to continue the message? I nodded. He pressed play. Howard appeared again. Still sitting, still looking right into the camera. But his tone had changed. He sounded tired. Worn out. But purposeful. I built Monroe Enterprises with one thing in mind. Legacy. I thought it meant buildings with our name, columns in business magazines, wealth that lasted generations. I was wrong. He took a breath. It wasn't weakness. It was control. Legacy is not built in assets. It's built in people. In the ones we shape, the ones we invest in when the world says they're not worth the time. That's what I failed to see. His voice dropped. Sarai, you were never just someone I let into the house. You were the only one in this family who never lied to me. Who never used my name to get ahead. Who never asked for favors or twisted my choices for selfish gain. Tears burned the backs of my eyes. You earned everything. And I've made sure no one can take that from you. Tessa stood up suddenly. Her hands clenched. She didn't speak, but her mouth opened like she wanted to protest. He didn't. She sat back down hard. Howard's voice softened now. I know this will anger them. Let it. They had my attention. You had my respect. And that's why I left the controlling shares to you. Silence. Even the walls seemed to listen. Howard leaned slightly closer to the screen. Don't waste your life trying to prove yourself to them. You already did. Walk forward, Sarah. Take what's yours. You were the future of this family the moment you walked through my door. I was just too proud to admit it. He paused again, then gave a rare faint smile. If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. You were never a burden. You were my redemption. The screen went dark. No music. No fade. Just black silence. No one spoke. No one breathed. No one could. For a moment after the screen went black, no one moved. I sat with my fingers pressed flat against the smooth wood of the table, staring at the laptop like it might flicker back to life and say something else. But it didn't. The message was over. And everything had changed. Calvin slowly pushed his chair back and stood, his body stiff like the weight of the moment had turned his limbs to concrete. This isn't over, he said. His voice was low but hard, like a threat disguised as a prediction. We'll contest this, he added. Mr. Blanchard barely blinked. You're welcome to. But I suggest you consult the Monroe Enterprises bylaws your father personally updated. It's all filed. The transfer of power is already in motion. Calvin stared at him. Then at me. Not with superiority anymore. Not even with disdain. Hooked, cornered. Tessa sat frozen. No phone in hand. No smirk. No bored detachment. Just shock. Like the room had spun and she couldn't keep up. She turned to me slowly. Did you know? She asked, voice shaky. Did you know this was coming? I looked her in the eye and said the only honest thing I could. No. I didn't. And I meant it. I had spent years thinking I was barely tolerated. A guest. An obligation. I never asked for any of this. Never schemed. Never expected a dime. But now, I was holding the keys to everything they believed belonged to them. And for once in my life I wasn't apologizing for it. I stood. My hands were steady now. Not from arrogance. From clarity. You made it clear for years that I didn't matter, I said, my voice calm but firm. Now you'll have to learn how to live with the fact that I do. Then I walked out. Not because I was angry. Not because I needed to prove a point. But because, for the first time, I didn't need anything from them. I didn't look back as I stepped through the front door of the Monroe estate. Outside the air was cool and clean. The kind of air that made you breathe deeper. I got into my car and closed the door, the leather seat creaking beneath me. For a moment I just sat there, my hand resting on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I had walked into that house as someone they thought they'd already erased. I was leaving it as someone who could no longer be ignored. It wasn't about the company. It wasn't even about the money. It was about that moment. Hearing him say it. That I wasn't a burden. That I was his redemption. That I mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or shake. I just exhaled. A long, deep breath that felt like it had been waiting in my chest for 12 years. The days that followed were a blur of documents, signatures, and urgent board emails. Mr. Blanchard handled the logistics. Efficient. Quiet. Loyal. The board of Monroe Enterprises called an emergency meeting. Calvin didn't show. He sent his lawyer instead. A brittle man with slick hair and a stack of papers attempting to delay the transfer of control. It failed. Howard Monroe had been meticulous. The paperwork was bulletproof. Tessa, in typical fashion, made it all public in the most indirect way possible. A vague social media post about betrayal and fake family. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She called once. Left a voicemail that started with forced warmth and ended in venom. Something about how I always played the long game, and how blood doesn't make you family. I deleted it. And I didn't return to the estate. I let the past rot behind its polished walls. Instead, I moved into a small apartment closer to the Monroe building downtown. Nothing extravagant, just clean lines, tall windows, and sunlight I didn't have to earn. No oil portraits. No antique rugs. No furniture I had to tiptoe around. Just space. I didn't bring anything from the estate. I didn't want ghosts where I slept. I wanted air. Light. Truth. The first morning I walked into Monroe Enterprises as the majority shareholder, the receptionist looked up like she didn't recognize me. "Sarai Monroe," I said. Her eyes widened. She stood immediately and buzzed me in. I stepped into the executive lobby like I belonged there, because now I did. People stared. Some whispered. Some pretended not to notice. But I didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Didn't offer explanations. I remembered what Howard had said. Don't waste your life proving yourself to them. You already did. I wasn't here to impress anyone. I was here to lead. The meetings that followed were interesting. The same men who once brushed past me at family functions now leaned forward when I spoke. The same women who dismissed me as the quiet one now measured every word I said. Respect didn't come overnight, but silence did. The kind that only falls when power enters the room. And I carried it with me like armor. In private, I still had questions. Why didn't he tell me sooner? Why did it take death for him to finally speak the truth? Why didn't he ever say it out loud while I was growing up? I don't have those answers. I may never. But I'm learning how to live with that. A month after the will reading, I visited his grave. I didn't bring flowers. I brought a letter. One I'd written the night before. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't angry. It was real. Thanked him. Not for the money. Not for the company. But for the message. For finally giving me the truth. I told him I would take care of what he left behind. Not for his legacy, but because I'd always known how to rebuild broken things. I left the letter at the base of the headstone and stood there until the wind picked up. Then I turned and walked away. Sometimes I still hear them. Not their voices now, not in the present, but echoes. Tessa's laughter when she used to correct me at the dinner table, pretending I didn't understand etiquette. Calvin's smug silence when I walked into a room and he kept talking like I wasn't there. All the small humiliations. The thousand little ways they reminded me I didn't belong. But something's different now. They no longer sting. They no longer stick. Because I'm not the same girl. I'm no longer the one clutching the edge of a chair hoping someone will notice I showed up. I'm not trying to be small to survive. I've already survived. And now I lead. Monroe Enterprises is no longer run by the man who built it with an iron grip and a tight jaw. It's led by me, someone who once fixed leaky sinks herself because no one thought she was worth helping. The changes didn't happen overnight. But they happened. I listened more than I spoke at first. Observed. Learned where the rot lived in the company's walls. The silent deals, the favoritism, the departments that had been running on fumes while the executives padded their bonuses. Then I made changes. Subtle at first. Quiet. I started by raising the minimum base salary across departments. Then I dismantled a long-standing executive incentive plan that paid out regardless of performance. There were murmurs. Resistance. One board member quit. He didn't even bother with a formal notice, just left a memo saying he refused to answer to a charity case with a new name. Let him go. The people who mattered, the people who did the real work, they noticed. The staff I used to walk past on my way to deliver groceries to the estate cook, they started saying, "Good morning." Then, "Thank you." Then, "We've never had someone like you in charge before." That mattered more than any headline. One afternoon, 3 months into my new role, I was going over quarterly reports in the executive lounge when a woman from HR knocked on my open door. She was older than me. Wore no makeup. Her expression was cautious. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but would you mind speaking at the next leadership summit?" I raised an eyebrow. "About?" She hesitated. "Your story." I smiled, not because I liked the idea, but because I understood what she was really asking. "You're not like them. You made it here a different way. Maybe people need to hear that." "All right," I said. "I'll do it." When the day came, I walked onto the stage in a black dress again. But this one I had chosen. No one had picked it for me. No one had opinions on whether it looked fitting. I walked onto that stage and saw faces I didn't recognize. Executives, analysts, interns. And I began. "My name is Sarai Monroe," I said. "Some of you knew me before that name had weight. Some of you didn't know me at all. But I want to tell you something that took me years to understand." I told them about my parents. About the night I arrived at Howard Monroe's door and was handed a room key, not a hug. I told them about the years of silence, the smallness, the constant effort to not be in the way. And then I told them about the video. The will. The truth. "He left me the company," I said. "But more importantly, he left me the truth. And I realized that truth changes everything." I didn't cry. I didn't break. But I watched faces in the audience shift. Eyes widen, jaws tighten. People heard me. Some even saw themselves in me. Afterward, a younger woman stopped me backstage. She looked nervous. "I know this isn't the time," she said, "but thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For making space for people like me. For reminding me that sometimes it's not about being picked. It's about choosing yourself." I didn't have words for that. Just a nod. And a smile that wasn't forced. A few days later I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was one line. "I see you now." No signature. But I knew the handwriting. Calvin. He hadn't tried to take the company back. Not yet. He hadn't shown up to board meetings. But he'd written that. I didn't frame it. I didn't respond. But I kept it. Not because it meant he'd changed. But because it meant he finally looked. Even for a second. That was enough. I still don't know if what Howard did was redemption or regret. I still wonder what it would have meant to hear the words he said in that video, in real life. Would it have changed who I became? Would it have softened me too early? I don't know. But I do know this. Sometimes the people who break you don't even know they're doing it. And sometimes they spend their final days trying to give you the only thing they never could in life. Not love. Not comfort. But truth. And when someone leaves you the truth instead of just things, changes everything. I go by Sarai Monroe now. Not because I need the name. But because I've earned it. Because I've bled for it. Because it's mine now. Not because it was given but because I became it. And that's the real legacy. Not money. Not buildings. But becoming someone no one can erase again. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of this reminded you of your own, of times you felt overlooked, underestimated, or unwanted, I hope it also reminded you of your strength. You're not defined by what others give you. You're defined by what you survive and who you become after. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me your truth. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear from you. If you want more stories like this, stories about truth, survival, and reclaiming your voice, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Don't miss what's next. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.